Up with the former Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce. Thanks for joining us, Barnaby. Look, a strange confluence of events in the last hour. Kevin Rudd was giving a speech and he was saying something that surprisingly I would agree with. I don't normally agree with Kevin Rudd, but he was saying we need to be careful in this debate about foreign interference and the relationship with China, not to go back down the old path of Hansonism and the yellow peril. Almost at that very same moment, Pauline Hanson was on this program talking to me, and she was saying that with Chinese political interference and investment in this country, that's the grand plan, to move Chinese people to Australia. Is that just going way too far in this debate?
Yep. And I think what we have to reflect on is the elections in Hong Kong, where 75% of the candidates now are pro-democracy candidates. Let's not confuse the two issues. You have every right to have a concern about an autocratic power and its alleged purpose of having influence, maybe a direct influence on our nation. We do know that there's been computer hacks. We do know that there's been issues of interference. We have an allegation that was put forward on the 60 Minutes report. We do have Nick Zhao, who was found dead on a motel floor. There are issues there that definitely need to be investigated, but to then take a sort of a leap and say that a certain race of people is somehow malevolent is ridiculous. I think Ms Hanson and Ms Lambie are in a fight to the death to come up with crazy things to say, and maybe this is just a return server. I don't know where that came from. There has been sort of more of a leaning towards a sort of a considered view and moderacy from Ms Hanson of late, but that was certainly a dim, dark view and an arrival back of the past.
It did seem like a throwback. Let's just have a look at some of that interview now.
We've got an ever-increasing population. The people have to move to somewhere because they're ever-increasing.
You're suggesting Chinese people? You're suggesting China wants to bring people here? Its domestic population here?
Yes. That's how I see the future. Yes, I do.
Yeah, very surprising comments there from Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce. As you're saying, it seems to be a throwback to rhetoric that we thought we'd left behind, and there was a much more rational and sensible discussion about foreign investment, about immigration, about all those related issues.
Yeah, that's what we want to discuss, because we have every right to discuss influence on our nation, ownership of our nation. Absolutely, that is our sovereign right as a sovereign nation to discuss those things. But when you bring in this sort of stuff away from the perimeters, you actually reduce the argument, because people say, I told you, it was all bat-poo crazy what you were saying, and this is an example why. And if you actually go to the history of China, they're not an expansionist China. There's never been, when they've been the preeminent power in the world, their desire to go live in other parts of the world. That's not how the Middle Kingdom works. But if you said there is an instance where the autocratic power of China tries to create supplicant states, well, yes, that is the case. We see that in places such as Cambodia and Laos. There is a desire for them to have an economic control, which could be to the detriment of the people they have control over, or definitely would be to the detriment. That's definitely something we should consider, and definitely something we should make sure we protect our nation against. We're in the invidious position where we have to recognise that they're our biggest trading partner, and we're also in the invidious position where we have to recognise that China is currently the autocratic power that I believe many Chinese, certainly if Hong Kong is an example, probably don't really support. That as they push forward, we are very reticent to push back because we are aware of the consequences. And of course, for any power, they say, well, that works very well. We just keep pushing forward, pushing forward, pushing forward. But they're pushing forward on an economic basis, in some instances on a military basis, but they're not pushing forward by pushing their people into other countries. They haven't done that before in history. They're not doing it now. And it's just a little bit perverse to suggest that for some unknown reason, people in China are going to stop wanting to live in China. That's where Chinese prefer to live, generally China.
All right, well, let's look at issues that are confronting the country in the here and now. Now, we've seen the Labor Party find itself compromised by relationships with China, and Sam Dastyari ended his political career because of that. These latest allegations focus on the Liberal Party and a Liberal Party member who, as you say, tragically ended up dead on a motel room floor. But what do the political parties, what do the coalition parties need to do to make sure in your own operations, forget about laws and foreign interference laws, what do you need to do within the party yourself to make sure you protect yourself from this sort of foreign interference, infiltration?
Well, first thing to recognise is probably the job of ASIO. They're going to have a vastly better knowledge of what is going on in assessing and doing an assessment on these type of issues. Also recognise that not only can you say a person is, unless you have all the knowledge at your hands, you can't say a person isn't. You have to rely on those who have the competency and the skills to do that for you, and rely on their judgment, rely on the system that does the assessment, rather than what a person says. I suppose in any political party, the length of knowledge you have about a candidate, the less likely it is that you're going to have any major surprises. And we just have to understand that we've got to have the system, the internal controls and the competencies in organisations such as ASIO to be able to protect our nation from this. And even that won't be perfect. You know, it's a good attempt, but it will never be perfect.
Yeah, you've got to make sure you don't overreact, of course, because the Chinese-Australian community is so big, is so vibrant, makes such a great contribution to this country. It's getting bigger with more immigration, and you want people from those communities to have good links back to China, commercial and otherwise. Yeah. And you want people like that to get involved in Australian politics. And there's a possibility here, I suppose, as Kevin Rudd was warning, that you tend to racially profile people out of the system.
That's correct, and obviously that's an insanity. And from a family where many of my nephews and nieces would be sort of, I suppose, if you want to racially profile, you'd say they're Asian. But it's an absurdity to think they're not patriots. It's an absurdity to think that they don't actually, like most human beings, treasure their freedoms, treasure what you get from a liberal democracy, treasure the capacity to be who they want to be without the encumbrance of the state just in every corner of their lives. This is something that is sort of ubiquitous in what human nature is. And it doesn't change by reason of the colour of your skin. I think that you should rely on the fact that most people want to be free, and that if you support that process, people will be on board with you. I think that ultimately that is something that humankind's been fighting for about 10,000 years. Maybe on a couple of 100,000 years there's been Homo sapiens, and for about the 10,000 years we've made that huge leap forward, that there'd be few people who understands the process who'd say, oh, what I really want to do is go back to an autocratic regime where one person tells me what to do in my life and can basically determine whether I live or die. I don't think that is a sane place to be, and if we basically engage on that level rather than on a racial level, you're going to have a lot more success.
Spot on, Barnaby Joyce. Well said. It's going to be a challenging debate in the days and weeks ahead, no doubt.
Thanks, Chris.
Barnaby Joyce there.